So now let's look at the second question. So just to recap, what are the three key questions? What do we make? How do we make it? And who gets it? And the first question of what do we make? We can make goods or services. So now the second question is, how do we make those goods or services? And so when we look at how we make goods and services, we need to look at our factors of production. So factors of production are those resources we use to make our goods and services. And we have four factors of production: land, labor, capital, and enterprise. And I am an American teaching in Canada, so I have a bit of a identity crisis. So sometimes you'll see labor spelled the American way, and sometimes you'll see it spelled the Canadian way. So I apologize for that. So let's break it down. Let's look at our four factors of production. And one of the challenging things we find in economics is we like to take words that have different meanings out in the real world and give them different definitions in economics. And so the term land is one of such things. Let's see if we can't get our slides to behave here. There we go. All right. So when we talk about land, we are talking about not the ground beneath your feet, but any natural resource, anything that's naturally occurring. So any gifts of nature are what we call land. So my apologies, those slides are having technical difficulties here. So let's just pull those back up. So land, any natural resources, anything naturally occurring. And those resources can be renewable or non-renewable. So the question is, why does it matter? Why does it matter if they're renewable or non-renewable? Well, what does that mean, non-renewable? Well, non-renewable means it doesn't come back on its own. So when it's gone, it's gone. If you are using resources to manufacture your product that are non-renewable, then what's going to happen to the cost of those resources over time? They're going to get more expensive, right? The less available, the more costly it's going to be. So as you look at what are you making and how are you making it, you have to consider the land you're going to need to make your product. So those are anything that's naturally occurring. So this would be any type of minerals, oil, gas. Are you using coal, trees, fish, water? Are you taking anything out of the air? So all of these are naturally occurring, and so they are considered in economics to be land. Okay. So our four factors of production are land, labor, capital, and enterprise. So let's look at the second one here, and that is labor. So labor is any human, physical, or mental effort that's used to produce goods or services. So when we talk about labor, these are, of course, your employees. Well, doesn't matter the availability of workers to your business. Well, the question is, can we hire more workers if we need to? So we can look at the unemployment rate to help us look at how much choice we're going to have if we hire more workers. So let's look here, for example, you can see the unemployment rates in July. And in Alberta, for example, the unemployment rate is 7.8%. Okay, higher than it's been over the last couple years, but down a bit over the last couple months. So what does that mean when your unemployment rate is higher? It means you have lots of choice on who to hire. So who are you going to hire if there are lots of people looking for work who can't find work? Well, you're going to hire the best, and you're going to hire the best for the least. Well, what if the unemployment rate is low? In the US, for example, right now, the unemployment rate is 4.4%. Okay, really low. Well, what does that mean? Do you have lots of choice then in terms of workers? Well, if the unemployment rate is 4.4%, it means you can't find workers. More jobs than there are workers looking when it's that low. So what does that mean for your business? Well, how do you keep the good workers? How do you keep them from going to the competition? You're going to have to pay them more money. And what about that worker who's only so-so? Well, if the unemployment rate was high, you'd get rid of them and replace them with someone else. But when the unemployment rate is low, you don't have an alternative, so you might hang on to them. I think back, for example, to 2005 in Alberta. Economy's booming, unemployment rate really low. We couldn't find enough workers. In fact, we had to lower the minimum age for working so we had enough workers to keep businesses going. I remember places like Wendy's having 13-year-olds at the drive-thru, businesses having to close and only be open certain hours because they just couldn't find enough workers. Okay? So we have to consider, as we look at how we make our goods and services, the availability of a workforce. Can we find the workers that we need? And here on the left graph, you see the unemployment rate for students. Notice the unemployment rate for students is about 13%. Okay? Why would the unemployment rate for students be higher than the unemployment rate for most provinces? Well, as a business, who would you rather hire? The experienced worker who's been working in the field for years, or the young employee who doesn't have a lot of experience? Now, as a student, you've probably been through that scenario where you can't find a job and they won't hire you because you don't have the experience. And how do you get the experience if they won't hire you? Well, the unemployment rate for students is always higher than the general population because businesses would rather hire someone who's more permanent. Students might be looking for a job only for the summer, and we're looking for someone who has more expertise, which of course is why you're here at Red Deer College. So as you're looking at your company and what you make, you have to consider the availability of workers, and of course you have to consider the cost of those workers. So we had land, we had labor, the third is capital. So capital is any produced means of production. And there are three types of capital. We have real capital, human capital, and intellectual capital. So let's start with real capital. Real capital are those capital goods. So we're talking machines, tools, roads, buildings, anything that was made and then is used to make something else. So tractors, computers, etc. Okay, that's real capital, capital goods. Human capital is education, work experience, on-the-job training, anything that improves the quality of labor. Seem to have just lost my words. Anything that improves the quality of labor. That's human capital. So let's write that up one more time. Education, work experience, job training. Intellectual capital is the patents, the copyrights, the trade secrets. That special how-to in terms of a particular product. So when we look at capital goods, we have real capital, so those are the machines, the tools. We have human capital, so education, work experience, anything that improves the quality of your labor, and then intellectual capital, which is the how to make a particular product. What about financial capital? What about money? Is it a factor of production? Well, we have a separate video on that, so check out the video, Is Financial Capital a Factor of Production? Before we leave the slide though, let's look at the graph on the right, and it shows you what's happening with human capital. So remember, human capital is education, anything improving the quality of labor, and you can see over time that we have increased the number of people in Canada with university degrees. Now it's just over 25%. In terms of some post-secondary, including diplomas and management certificates, we look at the population who has some college or university is about 64%. So our human capital is on the rise. Why does that matter? Well, the greater quality of our labor, the more productive our workers are. So the greater contribution a single worker has to the amount that is produced and to the value of what is produced. All right, so we talked about land, we talked about labor, we talked about capital. We have three types of capital: real, human, and intellectual. And our fourth factor of production is enterprise or entrepreneurship. So enterprise or entrepreneurship is where you take the land, you take the labor, you take the capital, you put it all together, and you create something new, something different, something that customers want. So when we talk about entrepreneurship, we're talking about really innovation. Okay, we're talking about putting all those factors of production together and making something new. If it wasn't for entrepreneurs, we wouldn't have laptops, we wouldn't have Velcro, we wouldn't have cell phones. Okay, somebody had to come up with these ideas. So for example, the cell phone. Somebody had to come up with the idea that we could take a phone that was tied to a wall, that was big and heavy. We can make it small, we can make it portable. Laptops, so small portable computers, Velcro. Someone had to come up with a way to make this, combining the land, the labor, the capital. And in fact, laptops and Velcro we have because of space exploration. We needed a way to take these into space. There is an article you can check out about farming and innovations that have happened in farming. Did you know that if it wasn't for entrepreneurs, we wouldn't have cows today that can milk themselves? Did you know that cows can milk themselves? Well, for about $250,000 to $500,000, you can buy a barn, and it's an automated barn, and the doors open, the cows go in, the cows are groomed, their temperature is taken, the machine connects to them, milks them, and then once it's done, the other door opens, the cows go on their way. The article I was referencing, that one tells you about how cows can text you. So we've seen lots of innovation in farming, and that's because of our entrepreneurs tying the land, the labor, the capital together. All right, so take a moment and see if you can identify whether the following are land, labor, capital, or enterprise. So pause the video and see if you can figure those out. All right, let's review. So a barcode scanner at the supermarket. Is it land, labor, capital, or enterprise? Well, it's not naturally occurring, so a barcode scanner would be capital. What kind of capital? Real capital. Someone made it, and then it's used to make something else. Well, what about fresh drinking water? Well, that depends. Is the water naturally occurring? If so, it's land. If it's not naturally occurring as fresh drinking water, if it has to be purified, then we have capital. Okay. What about copper deposits in a mine? That's land. What about the work of a business analyst looking at trends in the market? That is labor. What about the idea to add technology to an economics textbook? So this example is about having CD-ROMs attached to your books. Needs to be updated as an example. But what about your textbooks having electronic resources from the publisher? Okay. The idea to combine that technology with the textbook is enterprise. All right, what about an office building? Land, labor, capital, or enterprise? Well, an office building doesn't poof just appear on its own. We have to make it, and then it's used to make other things or provide a service, and so it is capital, real capital. Now, when we look at our land, our labor, our capital, our enterprise, we need to consider how these are paid for. So in economics, we have different terms for the money that is used to pay for each of these. So the term we use for the money used to pay for those natural resources is rent. We pay for labor with wages. We pay for capital with interest. And we reward our entrepreneurs with profits. So these are our factors of production. And these are our factor payments, how we pay for our factors of production. This is going to be important later on as we look at stimulating the economy and increasing spending and looking at what's happening in terms of the price levels in our economy, so the amount of inflation. We have to consider combined spending on wages and interest and rent and profits. So we're looking at those three key questions. What do we make? How do we make it? And who gets it? So we've looked at what do we make? We make goods or services. We're looking at how we make it. So we use land, labor, capital, and enterprise. And as we look at how we make it, we have to consider a number of things. So we look at how we make something, we have to consider the availability of those factors of production. We have to consider the cost. Those that are less available, what's going to happen to their cost? Costs are going to go up, right? And so as we make a decision about how to produce our goods or services, we could choose, for example, to use more capital goods, or we could choose, for example, to use more labor. So we have to look at the availability and the cost. So for example, let's suppose that you want to manufacture cars. Okay, so you have a car company and you are looking at building your cars and you're trying to decide how to manufacture those cars in Alberta versus, say, a location in China. Well, if we look at China, what do we know about them as a country, right? Large population, right? More people than there are jobs. Well, since there are lots of people, what does that mean about wages? So remember, if you have lots of people to choose from, who are you going to hire? You're going to hire the best for the least. So we find in places like China that we have lower wages, right? Because we have more labor to choose from. In Alberta, okay, compared to China, we have less labor available. And so we're going to see that wages there are going to be higher than in China. So as you look at in Alberta, should I make things with labor or should I make things with machines, automation, capital goods? So you have to look at the availability of your labor. You have to look at the cost of your labor. And you look at the capital goods and the land with that same trade-off as well. So we have to consider scarcity. That we have unlimited wants, but limited resources. And so we have to make choices. Okay. Now, not only do we consider availability, and cost. But as we look at our land, our labor, our capital, and enterprise, we also have to consider the opportunity cost of that land, labor. What is opportunity cost? Well, opportunity cost is the value of the next best alternative. So let's suppose you run McDonald's. Okay, and as manager of McDonald's, you've decided to tell your employees they're all going to make hamburgers. Well, if every single one of your employees is making hamburgers, then that means none of your employees are working at the drive-thru. So what's the opportunity cost of having a worker make hamburgers? Well, it's the other job they could be doing instead. Well, it doesn't make sense to have all of your workers make hamburgers because you can't actually sell any of those hamburgers if you don't have anyone working at the till or at the drive-thru. So we have to consider what else we could be doing with those resources, right? What else could we be doing with that worker? And what is the value of that other activity they could be doing? When we look at the choices that we make, right, because we have limited resources, limited number of workers, limited time those workers work, we have to make choices. And anytime you make a choice, you choose one thing. So an employee to make a hamburger instead of work at a till, there is a sacrifice. Something that they're giving up, and that is your opportunity cost. Okay, so there's no such thing as a free lunch. Even if I took you out to lunch and it was free, like I paid for it, there's still a sacrifice that you're making. That's time you could have spent doing homework, for example, or working a shift at work. So when we look at opportunity cost, we're looking at what are we giving up? What's the sacrifice? And we recognize that it has value. So does it make sense to have all your workers do one thing? Well, maybe you want them to do different activities. What are you giving up instead? What impact does that have on your business? So we look at the availability of our resources, the cost of our resources, the opportunity costs, so what we're giving up. And we need to look at the productivity. How much can we get from that particular resource? So if we're having a worker make hamburgers or we're having an automated machine make hamburgers, how productive is it? How many hamburgers can it make in a given time? So just look here at this image here. So we talk about productivity. We're talking about how much can we make. And we want to choose the resource that is more productive. That is, can make more. But even better than being more productive is to be more efficient. Because we want to be able to make more with less resources. So in this particular example here, you can see with 3 workers, some capital, some land, they can make 3 tables. Well, if you can do the same thing with less workers, then you are more efficient. You are making more with less. And so your combination of land, labor, capital should be that's the most efficient, that can make the most amount of units with the least amount of resources. So we have to consider availability of our resources. We have to consider the cost of them, typically based on availability. We have to consider the opportunity cost. What else could we be using that resource for? And we have to consider how productive or efficient we are with those resources. So we've looked at what do we make, and we've looked at how do we make it. The last question is to look at who gets it.